Well, welcome. We are in week 3 of a series that we're doing on marriage called TheVOW. So, if you've missed the first couple of weeks, we are going to review. But here's what I want to say. All across our nation, marriages are ending in divorce. People are waiting later to get married, and all that comes along with that. And the reality is, and I know we say that we're a church where no perfect people are allowed, and we are, without a doubt. There is very little judgment, hopefully no judgment here. What we want to say is God has a standard, and none of us can perfectly match that standard. But the reality is, for marriages in our country, for marriages in our community, and quite frankly, for marriages in our church that have struggled, that are struggling, that have ended, that maybe haven't even gotten off, on the best first foot yet, that struggling marriages, especially marriages that are ending in divorce, that it is unacceptable to us. Now, I'm not saying that from a standpoint of judgment. What I'm not saying is I'm not pointing my finger and saying, how dare you, you shouldn't, that's unacceptable. No, what I'm saying is that we're better than that you're better than that our God is greater than any struggle that we have. And I think as a church, for us to just sit back and say, you know what, that's just the way life is, right? That's just the way that people date these days. That's just the way that marriages are these days. That's just the way that it is. For us to just stand back and say that is unacceptable because God, not because God judges us, but because God has something better for us. Our God is greater than that. He's better than that. And as a result of that, our church is better than that, right? Our church can be greater than that. And I believe without a doubt that your marriage, your relationship, dating or married or single again, that your relationships can be so much better when we make Jesus a part of our lives, when we make God a part of our lives. So what we're doing is for the last couple of weeks and for this week and for next week, we're just kind of hitting the pause button on everything else and going, listen, I understand that not everybody in the room is married. I understand that not everybody in the room wants to be married, that some people are divorced. And I understand that some people have probably even skipped this series, like have not come to church because it's just like, I don't want to hear that again. I don't want to hear that again. I get it. But that's okay because we're going to hit pause on everything else and just for a couple of weeks, focus on something that I believe really matters to God. And that's healthy marriages. Healthy marriages. And we want them to start well. So for those of you who are dating and you're moving toward marriage, whether you found your number 2 yet or not, all right? Whether you found that person yet or not, but you're planning to move in that direction, we want to give you a good foundation. If you are married, whether your marriage is going great right now or it's struggling, because if it's going great right now, it will struggle. All right, without a doubt, I guarantee you it will struggle. We want to give you some tools to use, some language, some godly wisdom to help your struggling marriage. And for those marriages that have ended and maybe even there's a second or a third marriage, we want to say to you, man, God loves you. He accepts you where you are, but God's got a great plan for your marriage. All right, so that's what we're doing. We're in week 3, and like I said, we're going to review in just a minute. But before we review, how many of you, especially if you're married or maybe if you're dating and you're about to be married, soon, like you've actually set a date, all right, because some guys don't want to set a date, but, you're dating, you plan to be married soon, or maybe you are married. How many of you would say that you married or you are dating someone who is probably your opposite? Probably your opposite. All right, there I got a few. Okay, go ahead and put your hands back down. I would raise my hand and say that, I'm married to and I dated someone who is probably my opposite. When you're dating, you hear that opposites attract, right? Have you ever heard that phrase, opposites attract? Yeah. Unfortunately, sometimes what happens when you get married is that opposites attack. All right, opposites attack. Because as you're, and I've said this in the last couple of weeks, as you're dating, like you look at her and you think, man, she's just so laid back. She's so, she's so easygoing. All my friends love her because she's just so easy to get along with. And then you get married and you're like, man, she's just lazy. She needs to go get a job. Right? Like, or he's so perfect, like, he completes me because he helps me make good decisions, and he's always like, he's so organized, and he's my opposite, and he just sort of completes me. And then before you realize it's like you're married, and everything about him that you loved when you were dating, now he controls you too much. He's making all of your decisions for you. And remember last week we talked about, what you idolize, often you begin demonizing when you put your spouse in the wrong position. And so what happens a lot of times is that where opposites attract in dating, opposites attack when they're married. And this has been happening around the country this week, especially over the last maybe couple of weeks, because there's been this social media phenomenon that has brought out the opposites in people. And I'm just wondering if it may even be relationship ending. So I want to ask you a question. In just a second, we're going to play some audio, and I need to know what you hear in this audio. So guys, turn it up and let's play it.
Laurel, 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 Laurel.
Raise your hand if you've
Laurel.
heard that video or seen it at some point
Laurel.
on social media. Okay,
Laurel.
good. There you go. Put your hands back down.
Laurel.
All right, let's kill the
Laurel.
audio. Okay, so some of you are
Laurel.
out there like, I've never heard of this. I have no idea what's going on. So here's what I need you to do. Raise your hand if when that played, you heard Yanny, Yanny, Yanny. Okay, a few of you weirdos in the room. Okay, put your hands back down. Raise your hand if you heard the word Laurel. Laurel. See, those are all the right and righteous people. All right, put your hands back down. Listen, yeah, I mean, my ears are different than Stephanie's ears. Like just in our relationship, we heard that, and she's like, it says Yanny, Yanny. Yeah, I'm like, no, it's like this deep voice going, Laurel, Laurel, Laurel. We heard two different things. A lot of times, that's what happens in relationships, right? That because you've been attracted to your opposite, or maybe you married someone who's, even if they're not your exact opposite, there are things that you disagree about. Sometimes you say something, or you think you said something, and your spouse, your significant other, they heard the exact opposite, right? I mean, it happens sometimes. Yes, I know, especially all of you wives. I know that you say things to us as guys all the time, and we have what is called selective hearing. It just happens, and we hear the opposite of whatever that you said to fold the laundry, and we heard go hunting, all right? Like, that's what we heard. We heard, can you help me take care of the kids? Or you said, can you help me take care of the kids? And we heard, like, just sit back in that recliner and turn the volume up a little bit louder. Like, I mean, I don't know how it happens, but sometimes opposites attract and sometimes opposites attack. Here's the reality. Satan wants to use our differences to tear us down. Satan wants to use our differences to divide our relationships. But we are different by design. And God can use and wants to use our differences to make us stronger together, to unite us, to make us even closer together, not to separate us, but to strengthen us. That's what God wants to do for your marriage, all right? That's what we're talking about today, is actually that two flesh becoming one flesh idea. It's the idea of partnership. Everybody say partnership. Partnership. Now, we've had two vows so far. Today's vow number 3. If you're taking notes, it's in your notes. If you don't have the little worship guide, that's all right, because most of it's going to be on the screen. So let's review vow number 1 from week 1. It was our vow of priority. Everybody say priority. All right. So I promise God will be my what? First priority, and that my spouse will be my second. All right. Good. So you got that one. Listen. You do that, and you've gone a long way to a better marriage. You make God your first priority and your spouse your second. Your spouse is your number 2. You do that. You make God your first priority, your spouse your second priority above everything else, and you're a long way down the road to a great marriage. So then last week, we talked about the vow of pursuit. All right, and some of you went out and you pursued your spouses this week. All right, I spent some time pursuing my spouse out of town this week a little bit. But we made this vow, and it was this: I promise to always. All right, let's try that again. I promise to always pursue my two. I promise to always pursue my two. So vow number 3 for this week is the vow of partnership, the vow of partnership. And it goes like this: I promise our marriage will be all about we, not me. I promise our marriage will be all about we, not me. That's partnership. I know, it's very easy. It is. It's very easy to say, I will make it all about me and not we. It's easy to confuse those words. But the vow of partnership is that I will make our marriage, I promise that I will make our marriage all about we and not all about me. Now listen, I said it last week, I'm going to say it again. You take these vows to heart. Put them to work in your marriage. Your marriage will not be perfect. You will have struggles. But I promise you, 100% money-back guarantee, that you do these things and you will have a great marriage. That God's design for marriage is better than the world's design for marriage. And when you put these vows, when you put them into action in your relationship with your spouse or your future spouse, your marriage will be a stronger, better relationship. So I'm going to make God my first priority, my spouse my second priority. I'm going to pursue my number 2, and I promise to make my marriage all about we and not about me. Now, we've taken the first 2 and this third vow from the same verse every single week, and we're going to look at this verse again one more time next week. It's Genesis 2:24, because in the very beginning, God created Adam and Eve. He created, the whole world, and then he put Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and he blessed their relationship. And he told them that they are going to, and their children are going to, leave their mothers and fathers and come together, and the two would be united as one. That's where we get the idea of marriage. So let me read to you Genesis 2:24. It says this: that is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. They become one flesh. Now, in just a second, I'm going to read from Matthew chapter 19, because Jesus quotes this verse, and then he adds a little bit to it, all right? Jesus quotes this verse, and he adds a little bit to it. But before I read that, and before we talk about especially what Jesus added to it, and we go through the rest of this vow of partnership, I just want to say on the front end, again, I said it a little bit earlier, that I understand things happen in life, right? That divorce especially happens, that things happen that cause marriages to end. And I hope that you'll understand. That's why I'm repeating it now, like I said it before. I hope you'll understand that I don't want you to hear judgment in my voice at all, judgment in this message at all. And I don't want you to hear judgment from Jesus, because those things happened. But if they happened, that's in the past, okay? You cannot change your past. Without a doubt, there are natural consequences to the decisions that we've made in our past, both good and bad. But it's in the past. You may still be, and especially when we talk about divorce, you may still be suffering some of the consequences, some of the natural consequences. Your children, if you had children before you were divorced, and you divorced, whether or not you're remarried, your children may still be struggling with some of the consequences of that divorce. But let me tell you this morning, it's in the past. You cannot change your past, but without a doubt, God can change your future. So what I want to set the standard for this morning, the way I want to set this table, is for those of you who have struggled with that one flesh, that partnership issue in the past, let that be your past. Without judgment, without hesitation. I mean, certainly, if you have not said to God, God, I realize it was wrong, I messed up, maybe your spouse messed up, but listen, you're not in control of your ex at all. All you can do is control yourself. And so you say, God, I realize I sinned in your sight, that we broke this bond that you created. And I'm confessing that to you. God, please forgive me. I want my future to be better. I want my future family to be better. I want my current marriage, if you're in marriage number 2 or marriage number 3, whatever that is, I want this marriage, I want this relationship to be founded on who you are. I want to make you my first priority and give your future to God. Okay? Are we all on the same page? Yes, good. Okay. So then here's what Jesus says. In Matthew chapter 19, verses 4 to 6, he quotes Genesis 2:24, And he says, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. And then he adds, so they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. Or depending on the translation that you may have heard, when you were younger, what God has joined together, let no man put asunder, right? Because you're going to have to put us under at death, right? That's how we separate at death. What God has joined, let no man separate. Listen, that is God's plan for marriage. That is Jesus' plan for marriage. When God ordained the sanctity of marriage between a man and a woman, he intended it to be forever. He intended it to be until death we do part, until death parts us. And what Jesus is saying here is nobody should get in the way of that, even yourselves, right? Even the husband and wife. Let no man separate this marriage. That is God's plan, and anything that gets in the way of God's plan is simply wrong. It is sinful, it is wrong, and we have to learn how to deal with those temptations. We have to learn how to get past. Again, if it's a mistake in your past, it's in the past. We've got to learn how to go forward. If it's somewhere that you're struggling right now in your marriage, that's why we're having this series, right? So that you can have some conversations together, so that you can look at your spouse and say, here's what I want to do. I'm working hard. I want to make God my priority. You're my number two. I want to pursue you. I know that seems weird because I haven't done it in a while, but I want to pursue you. And I am about we. I'm going to be about we. Listen, again, you can't control your spouse. If there's struggling going on right now in your marriage, you cannot control what they do, but you can control what you do. And God's plan for your life, if you are married, and if you are planning to be married in the near future, is that it's all about we. It's not about me. One flesh. You have come together as one flesh. So number one is this. Marriage is a covenant, not a contract. Marriage is a covenant, not a contract. In the world in which we live today, a lot of people my age and younger simply see marriage as a convenience, maybe. They see marriage as just a piece of paper. Marriage is just a formality. Like marriage is that thing you have to do if you want to get a tax benefit. All right? I mean, the reality is not everybody, but a lot of people my age and younger really see marriage as just a piece of paper. It's just a contract, right? I mean, I love you, you love me, I love him, he loves me. See where I'm going with this one? And it's just a contract. It's just what the government says that we have to do to be seen as married. God says no. This is a union, a holy union, a covenant between one man and one woman that lasts for life. That's God's plan in the perfect world, and that is God's perfect plan for marriage. One woman, one man, united for life. It is a covenant, not a contract. A contract is based on distrust. A covenant is based on commitment. A contract is based on distrust, all right? I'm a licensed attorney in the state of Mississippi. I'm inactive, and so therefore I must, according to the state of Mississippi, tell you that I cannot give you any legal advice. And I also made a D in contracts, so you probably don't want to ask me anything about contracts, okay? But the one thing that I do know about contracts is the reason that you sign a contract is because you don't trust the other person to follow through with the contract. Like if you could literally just, spit in your hand and shake theirs and, say, let's do this and believe everybody, there would be no need to ever have any contracts. Listen, if this was a perfect world, there would be no need to have a contract. Everybody would just tell the truth. They would do what they say they're going to do. But we know we live in a world where sin exists and that doesn't happen. That people, even well-meaning people, don't always follow through on what they say they're going to do. That's why we have contracts. It gives me some protection. I know, for instance, when we lived here years ago before we moved away, we owned a house right over here in Ranch Meadows, and we built it. It was our first house that we moved into, and we talk about it all the time. We drive by every now and then and see how they've screwed it up since, because it was perfect when we lived there, but it's not perfect anymore. I'm just kidding. But you know, we lived there, and we moved away, and we were trying to sell the house, and the house wasn't selling, and we were in this really bad apartment that we had to get out of. And so finally a couple came along that said they wanted to lease it, like do a year lease purchase option kind of thing. And I didn't want to do that, but I really wanted to get out of the really bad apartment that we were in over in Alabama, because I think the people next door were just like cooking meth, and I'm serious, we were sick all the time, and it was crazy. We had to get out. So I accepted the deal, and we wrote up a contract. And when we wrote up the contract, we included a provision that gave us a lot of money if they broke the contract, right? Because the deal is, you're living in the house that I'm trying to sell, and if you mess it up, I get some of your money that the bank's going to hold on to us for a while. I get some of your money if you mess up my house, because I don't trust you. We messed up the house, and we got the money. Actually, we ended up selling the house to them, and we sold it for a little bit of a loss because, you know, that's how the market was doing then, and it was bad. But we had that contract to give us a layer of protection. Your marriage is not about, if you screw up, I'm going to hold it over your head, and I've got something to help me when you hurt me. That's not what marriage is all about. It is not a contract. It is a covenant. Now, some of you may be, new to church, new to biblical language. Maybe you've heard the word covenant, like, you bought a house in a neighborhood that had a restrictive covenant, and you're wondering what that's all about. Okay, that kind of covenant is a little different than a biblical covenant. All right, but here's what a biblical covenant was. It was a promise between two people that is a 100%. It's not like 50-50. It's we're in this 100%, both of us. And basically, I own you and you own me under the terms of this covenant, whatever the covenant was to do, because it was more than, there were more than one kind of covenant, not just for marriage covenants. There were lots of different kinds of covenants. But the word covenant is the word berith. It means a cutting, a binding agreement, or a blood covenant. So here's what would happen. As a matter of fact, when God made a covenant with Abraham, this is what they did, because usually you had two equal people who would make covenants with each other, but in the case of God and Abraham, they cut a little different kind of covenant, because obviously God is not equal to Abraham and vice versa. But what would happen in an ancient biblical covenant is they would take an animal and they would cut it in half, head to toe, basically. And they would take those two pieces of the animal side by side, and they would walk between the two pieces, the two halves of the animal, most often like holding each other by the ear, sort of dragging each other along, but somehow clasping hands, arms, whatever, walking between that animal. And whatever promise they made to each other, what they were saying is, I'm with you 100% in this promise, and you're with me 100% in this promise. And if one of us breaks this promise because we're 100% right now, we are coming together as one, then we get to do that to the other. Cut you in half. Okay? So when God ordained the covenant of marriage, and he says the two are becoming one flesh, and we say, let no man put asunder, or until death do us part, like that's God's intention, is that when a marriage ends, I mean, even if it's a clean break and, you get half the house and I, whatever that, even if it's a clean break, that it's still the death of something. It's the death of one flesh. And so what would happen in the Old Testament in a marriage, all right, in a marriage, and I don't want to get too graphic here, but this is God's plan. So in the Old Testament, because the Leviticus teaches us that life is in the blood, that the life is in the blood, and without the shedding of blood, there can be no forgiveness of sins, all right? Blood has a big role in faith, especially in the Old Testament. It still has a big role in our faith, because Jesus shed his blood to take away our sins, to take away the sins of the world. So what would happen in an ancient Hebrew marriage is the two would come together, and the priest would be presiding over the marriage, and as they're saying their vows, what the priest would do is take a knife and cut the hand of the groom and the hand of the bride, and then they would clasp hands to signify the commingling of their blood, the commingling of their lives, and then the priest would wrap a cord around their two clasped hands to signify that, like Genesis 2:24, they had been united, tied together, that the two have become one flesh. Now, when Stephanie and I got married, we didn't cut our hands, all right? But we did that because we wanted that symbolism to be there, that we had been tied together. So my dad presided over our wedding as well as Stephanie's uncle, and when he, tied us together, our two became one flesh. It's about the blood. Now take that forward. This is God's beautiful plan for marriage. There's been a shedding of blood. The two have become one flesh. Go forward to the honeymoon night. In God's perfect plan, the virgin groom would enter his virgin wife, and there would be a shedding of blood, and the two would become one flesh. Physically, spiritually, it is a bond that God created. The beauty of lovemaking, and I don't want to get any more graphic than that, is what God gave marriages to bind us together. That's God's plan. And that we would never be separated. That for the rest of our lives, we would enjoy one another. And yes, there will be some struggle. And without a doubt, there will be some pain. But that what is designed for marriage would stay inside of the bounds of marriage. What's designed for a husband to enjoy, what's designed for a wife to enjoy, would be what the husband and wife enjoy together from their wedding night throughout their lives. That's what a covenant, a blood covenant, is all about. And that's what marriage is all about. But here's what's happened. Here's where our world is today. And where, frankly, it's been for generations. I mean, this is nothing new. But for generations, I think more and more today, more and more in my generation and the generation behind me, is that people pretend to be married. They begin doing things that married people do. They see marriage as a piece of paper. It's just an inconvenience. It's something that we have to go to a church or to a judge for. But listen, sweetheart, I love you. And I mean, it would be so much cheaper if we just move in together. All right? I mean, like, you've got your bills, I've got my bills. I mean, we work closely. Well, like, we could ride to work together. We only pay one apartment rent. It's just, it's convenient. And so people begin to pretend to be married and to do what married people do. Here's your toothbrush. Here's my toothbrush, right? Here's your keys. Here's my keys. Let's get a pet together. All right? Let's get a pet together. Move in together. They pretend to be married, and they do what married people do. And then what often happens? They break up. It's not a divorce. They were never married. But guess what they're doing? They're practicing for the future. Because when you pretend to be married and you do what married people do, you have become one flesh in God's sight. And then when you break up and you go your separate ways, and he takes his toothbrush and goes back to his apartment, and she takes her toothbrush and goes back to her apartment, and there is a break, you are, they are, we are practicing divorce. And what happens is, in many relationships, for many individuals, they pretend to be married and they practice divorce 2, 3, 4, maybe even 16 or 18 times. It's no wonder when they finally find the perfect person and they finally say, I do, and they finally live together as a husband and wife with a contract that somebody signed and the government recognizes, it's no wonder that when struggles happen, they break up, because practice makes permanent. What they've been practicing becomes the permanent decisions that they're going to continue to make. That's not how every marriage ends in divorce by any means, but it's how a lot of marriages end in divorce. Because people are pretending to do what God ordained for married people to do together. Let's stop pretending. Let's start living in a covenant. Listen, again, no judgment. I've said this to crowds before. If that's you and you're not married, man, let's make it right. Like, well, I'll do it today, I mean, we'd go get the marriage, like the license from the state tomorrow, but we can have a little ceremony right here. Like, after church, come find me and we'll invite a few people to stay. And before God, like, we'll make a covenant vow. You will make a covenant vow to one another. It would be awesome to be able to be a part of some of the marriages that need to happen in and around our church and our community, where people simply say before God, listen, we're going to make you our first priority. You know, sharing the bills is not priority number one. God is priority number one. And you are my two, and I'm going to stand in the presence of God and say this. Listen, at a very large church, I would do, we'd do baby dedications like we did last week. We'd do them a couple of times a year, and there would be, at two different services, one on a Saturday night, one on a Sunday morning, we'd have like 100 couples on stage with their little babies. I mean, it was a big church, and there'd be a lot of babies born every year. And the week before, I would do this class, and I would tell them, who can be on stage, like it's mom and dad and the kid. We don't have space for grandparents. We don't have space for aunts and uncles. And part of what I would tell them is, listen, if you're not married, part of what you're saying to the church is, I want to raise my child in a Christian home. I want to raise them honoring and fearing God. And so if you're not married, then you're still a single mom, or you're still a single dad. And so if you're a single mom, you can be on stage with your child. If you're a single dad, you can be on stage as a single dad with your child. But you're not going to stand there as a married couple because you're not a married couple. Our church, and God is not blessing that commitment because that's not the commitment you're making. You're saying, I'm a single mom, and I'm going to try to raise my child in a single home. And without a doubt, every single time I would teach that, there would be people in the audience who did not really like that, and I'd have a line of 5 or 6 people who wanted to have a conversation about it, and we'd talk about it. And I remember one couple in particular, they had a long-distance relationship. They lived about an hour apart because he lived with his mama and took care of her, and she lived with her mama and took care of her, but then they would hook up somewhere in the middle regularly, and they kind of had their space and their place, and they had a child together. They'd never been married. And I just looked at her, and I was like, this is, he's standing there and she's standing there. I'm like, is that what you want, like, for the rest of your life? Is this is this where you want to be in your relationship, or do you want it to go somewhere else? Well, obviously, she wanted it to go somewhere else. Look at him. Is this what you want? Is this where you want? And he made like every excuse in the book about how he just could not get married. And I just looked at her and said, you need a better man than this. Because if he's not going to pursue you and make you his number 2 in front of his mama now, he's never going to do it in the future. And I know he's your baby daddy, and I would love to see a wedding happen and a marriage happen where the two of you, are right in the eyes of God. But I'm just telling you now, he's not that into you. Listen, if that's the relationship you're in, realize it. Wake up. Wake up. God has a better plan for your marriage. God has a better plan for your relationship. And if you want what everybody else has, then just do what everybody else does. You don't need the church to help you with that. You don't need me to help you with that. You don't need the government to help you with that. I don't want what everybody else has. I want something better. I want what God wants for my life. For this reason, let no one separate what God has put together. So, the second thing, number 2, is that a covenant partnership is summarized with godly leadership and mutual submission. A covenant partnership, because remember, we're talking about the word covenant, talking about what a partnership, this vow of partnership. A covenant partnership is summarized with godly leadership and mutual submission. Now, say that word submission, and probably some of you kind of, shimmied and shook and thought I don't want to go there, right? Because you hear the word submit, especially tied to church, and you think, especially ladies, oftentimes you cringe a little bit because that word has been used and abused, okay? Let me start here. Let me start at the place that Paul starts. It's mutual submission. Mutual submission. Ephesians 5:21 says this, and he's talking to husbands and wives, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Submit to one another. It's mutual submission. Submission is not about the guy being in control and the woman doing whatever he tells her to do. That's not what submission is all about. It's mutual submission. Now, in every single relationship, there's almost always, I would say always, there's always one who is more passive, and there's always a spouse who's more aggressive, all right? So just like real quick, raise your hand if you feel like you're the more aggressive one in your relationship. Okay, put your hands back down. Raise your hand if you think you're the more passive one in the relationship. Put your hands back down. Those of you who didn't raise your hand because you're not sure, you're passive. All right? Just going to tell you. If you had to lean over to your spouse and say, honey, what am I? Again, you're passive. All right? You're the more passive one. Listen, there's nothing wrong with one or the other. All right? I'm just pointing out the reality, the fact that often there's one who's more aggressive, often there's one who's more passive. Unfortunately, what happens in a lot of relationships, not all relationships, but in some, is that a husband who is more aggressive will lord over the wife who is more submissive with this idea of submission. And say, well, woman, if you just want to be a good Christian, you heard what the pastor said. He said you got to submit to me, so do what I tell you to do, because he's the more aggressive person. And unfortunately, a lot of times what happens is that aggression turns into abuse. And again, I want to say to you ladies, if that's the relationship that you're in, your marriage can still be saved. Your husband or your wife, if you're on the other side, but your husband can be redeemed by the power of God. But if you are in a relationship that is abusive, it may not be time to end the relationship, but without a doubt, it's time to get out of the house. And if that's you or if it's somebody you know, again, talk to me. We'll help you find a place to go. There are plenty of places in DeSoto County, in Shelby County, that will take women and help you get back on your feet, and we can approach your husband in the right way, in the proper way, and help restore him and restore your marriage to what God intends it to be. But it's that twisting that Satan wants to happen in our differences to drive us apart that causes abuse to happen. And abuse is not a godly thing at all, ever. Submission is about us submitting to one another. But the verse does go on. The verse does go on. What God teaches us does go on. So in verse 22 it says this, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. That's Ephesians 5, 22 to 24. Submission is not about control. Submission is not about control. It's about commitment. Let me say it again. Submission is not about control. It's about commitment. I am so committed to this relationship that I'm going to mutually submit to my spouse. I'm so committed to this relationship that as a wife, even though I may disagree with my husband, he's leading me in the direction that he believes God wants us to go. And even though I'm not like 100% sure that it's the best way, I'm going to submit and I'm going to go along with it. For a husband who's leading his family the way that God wants him to lead his family, submission looks like this. There's something that I want to do. There's something that I think it would be a good decision for our family, but my wife, she has second thoughts. She doesn't think it's great. And so because it's all about we and not all about me and what I want, I'm going to submit myself to her will and say, okay, like if you're having second thoughts, then we are not going to do it because we are together in this. Now, it's a fine line. I can't tell you what all decisions need to be his or hers or ours, but always err on the side of submission. It's not about control. It's about commitment. It's about committing to one another. Men. Some spouses are abusive. I already talked about that. But oftentimes, what I see in the world around me is men who have become passive. Be a man. God called you to be the head of the church, to be the head of your family, as Christ is the head of the church. Stand up and be a leader. And I'm not telling you that you're controlling your wife, you're giving orders, you're barking commands. That's not what I mean at all. But God has ordained your position in your family to lead your family to walk with God. God has put you as the head of your family to set the vision for the direction that your family's going. He's put you as the head of your family to set the priorities that your family is going to have in the eyes of God to take God to the world. He's made you the head of the family to provide and protect. And I'm not saying that all stay-at-home dads are like sinful, but listen, if you're a stay-at-home dad and your wife's not being provided for and protected for, go out and get a job. Your role is to lead your family the way that God intended you to. It's not to sit back and say, well, you know, I'm just mutually submitting, so whatever you want, I'm good with. Because that's what men are doing all across our nation. They're abdicating their responsibility and their God-given position as the head of the household to their wives. And quite frankly, their wives are making much better decisions than they ever would. But again, that's not God's role for the marriage. It's that we do it like this. It's all about we. You see, Stephanie and I are different, right? I mean, we are different. Like, she likes HGTV and Pinterest, and I like, like the Expendables and, shoot 'em up flicks and sci-fi movies, all right? Stephanie likes, she likes shopping. She likes shopping. I like shooting guns, all right? Late at night, she really likes to have conversations. We're different, all right? But I would be crazy as a husband to discount her differences in our relationship. There are so many times that I, like maybe we're planning, Nathan's probably heard me say it at least a dozen times since I've been a pastor here. I like that idea, Nathan, and it may have even been mine or his or somebody else on the team. I like that idea. Let me go ask Stephanie what she thinks about it. Not because I think that, not because I'm a passive husband who has to go to my wife for approval for everything, but what I know is she has your best interest at heart. And I know that she knows women better than I know women, all right? And I know when somebody comes up with the idea of a bath bomb, who to ask. Is that a decent Mother's Day present or not? Actually, it was her idea, so, y'all can blame her, pat her on the back for it. But I thought it was a great idea because I had, some stupid idea. I don't remember what it was, but we didn't do that because we did her idea. Listen, you are crazy as a husband if you discount your wife's differences as just being less than yours, and vice versa. I am so grateful and so thankful that I've been blessed with a wife who's smart, who's intelligent, who is a godly woman, who, we've started over, Jack and Betty, several times, moved 1,000 miles away, and we started over. And it seems like we keep starting over. I'm ready to not start over. We came here, and I plan to stay here. What I said was, God, you've got to send a whale on land to ring the doorbell and swallow me and take me to the next place. Tired of starting over. But every time we made that decision, she would say to me, because I'm always the first there. I'm the aggressive, let's go get it, right? I know this is God's will, and let's go. And she's a little slower getting there. But what she always says to me is, if you think this is what's best for our family, then I'm for it, because I believe that you're leading our family in the direction that it should go. I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes. I make mistakes all the time. But we try to do this together. Not perfectly, but we try. It's all about we and not about me. It's not about dictatorship. Giving orders is dictatorship. Men, it's about leadership. You set the tone, you set the direction, you set maybe the standard along with her, and then you mutually submit to one another. Some of you would say, well, that's easy for you to say, you're the pastor, and you were high school sweethearts, and you've known each other forever, and you finish each other's sentences, and you've got 4 perfect, beautiful children. It must just be so easy for you to have this perfect little Christian marriage. Are you kidding me? The same drama that's in your life is in my life. We all have a little crazy in our extended families, right? We all deal with that kind of stuff. We all deal with bills. We all deal with temptation. We all have that. I have that in my life. And I would even say that for us, we struggle with the stress of always looking perfect because that's the expectation. You're the pastor and the pastor's wife. And so there's this high expectation of everything's got to be perfect. And if your kid says the wrong thing, you're a terrible pastor. If your kid says the wrong thing, you're a terrible wife and mom and pastor's wife. And that's the stress that we live under. And I know a lot of you have stress. Listen, my marriage is far from perfect. but we're always working on it. And the reason that we've been married now for 19 years and we've been together for almost 24 years as a couple, it'll be June 30th, we'll be 24 years as a couple, is because we work on it. I will not allow Satan to split my marriage apart. And when I see that beginning to happen, it's usually me that needs to make a course correction because I'm the leader of my family. Husbands, lead your families. Wives, lovingly submit to your husbands. Husbands, if you wish that she would respect you and submit to you, give her something worth respecting and submitting to. Because I don't know if you really were paying attention, but it says that for the husband is the head of the wife. We always like to hear that one. As Christ is the head of the church. How did Jesus love the church? He gave himself up for her. He died to set us free. Husbands, sometimes we lay our lives down. Not physically, like most of us would say, we'll take a bullet for our wives. That's not what I'm talking about. Sometimes we have to lay down our own selfish ambitions to put our wives as our number two. God as our number one, our wives are our number two. Not whatever else it is that we want to go and do. Husbands, give your wives something to respect and submit to. Wives, give your husbands a reason to love you. Like I talked about last week, as you pursue him, say those kind words. Say those things to him that stroke his ego just a little bit. Say to him what you want him to be, not what you wish that he wasn't. And he will become eventually what you want him and what God wants him to be. Your marriage will be as good as both of you decide it will be. Your marriage will be as good as both of you decide it will be. I understand if your marriage is struggling, probably one of you is struggling more than the other. More than likely. It happens. I get it. But it's about both of you. Your marriage will be as good as both of you want it to be. I promise that there's going to be times when you don't feel like it. I don't feel like it. I don't feel like being nice anymore. He's driving me crazy. She's driving me crazy. I don't feel like forgiving him. I don't feel like working on this with her. Just put your feelings in a box. It's not about what you feel. I mean, where else in life do you get to say, I don't feel like feeding my baby, so I'm just not going to. Good luck with that. It won't happen, right? Baby dies. I don't feel like going to work today. Good luck with that. Your job ends. I don't feel like paying taxes. Now we're locking you up. All right? In your marriage, I don't feel like moving forward. Marriage is not about your feelings. It's about your commitment. Marriage is not, the strength of your marriage is not based on how you feel about it. It's based on how committed you are to it. You know, some of you might even say, well, I don't love him anymore. I just kind of fell out of love with her. I don't have any love left. It's empty. Let me put it to you this way. Getting a divorce based on an empty love tank is like selling your car because you have an empty gas tank. How many of you would make that decision? None of you. What do you do when you run out of gas? You fill it back up. What do you do when you run out of love? You fill it back up. Gas costs something. Filling up your love tank, filling up your spouse's love tank is going to cost you something. It is going to be inconvenient. You may have to stop wherever it is that you want to go to pause for a moment to refill that tank. But don't let your marriage end because you don't feel like it. Don't let your marriage end because you're out of love. Fill it back up. That's vow number 2. Pursue your number 2. And you will refill their love tank, and they will refill your love tank. See, what happens is we get to vow number 3, and we just want to, like, we're hanging on to this marriage for dear life, right? Because we're all Christians, and we know that divorce is wrong, and, God's not going to like it if I get divorced, and the church is going to think less of me, and then what church are we going to go to? Because I love my church, and she loves her church, and then if we get divorced, like, do I sit on one end of the pew and she sits on the other? Like, what decision are we going to make? And we're holding on to that so tightly that we want it to be a partnership, and we've completely forgotten about vow number 1 and vow number 2. Promise you, 100% money back guarantee. Make God your first priority, your spouse your second priority. Always pursue your 2. Make it about we, not about me, and you will have your healthy marriage. Let me close this way. Let me end with this. You can either be united or untied. You can either be united or untied. The difference is what place I is in. If I is in the right place, you'll be united. But if I am putting myself in the wrong place, my marriage will come unraveled. It will come untied. Make it about we and not about me.